Buddy Holly sat up in bed. He couldn't sleep. Insomnia was just one of the many symptoms that continued to plague him as the result of an unfortunate injury he'd sustained decades earlier. He got up and poured himself a glass of water. He turned on the TV. Every station showed pretty much the same thing. Fake people with fake smiles trying to sell late-night viewers things they didn't need. The overly enthusiastic man on the screen advertised something called a face blanket, which was nothing more than a tiny blanket for your face with carefully placed holes so you could breathe and drink your wine. Buddy Holly turned off the TV and went for a walk. He walked down a street he hadn't been down in years. It still looked the same as he remembered it, except all the lights were off and the stores were all closed. The streets were pretty much empty at this time of night. Buddy Holly noticed a homeless man sitting up ahead on the sidewalk with a shopping cart full of belongings. The musician intended to walk past the man without engaging in any sort of interaction, but as he approached him, the man looked up and called out to him.
"Hey, buddy,"
he said. Buddy Holly wasn't sure if perhaps this man recognized him as the famous musician that he was, and was calling him by his name, or if he was just simply using the generic form of the word buddy. In any case, the man had succeeded in getting Buddy Holly's attention and asked him for some money. Buddy Holly noticed a guitar among the man's assorted possessions, and he told him that he'd give him $2 if the man would play a song for him. The man wanted the money up front, and Buddy Holly agreed to give him $1 in advance, and the other upon the conclusion of the man's performance. Without another word, the man picked up the guitar and played a haunting rendition of That'll Be the Day.
Well, that'll be the day when you say goodbye, yes, that'll be the day when you make me cry. You say you're gonna leave, you know it's a lie, 'cause that'll be the day when I die. Well, that'll be the day. Ooh, that'll be the day. Well, that'll be the day. That'll be the day.
Look, I'm an owl.
After Buddy Holly had paid him, the man asked what he thought of the song. Buddy Holly shrugged and said that it was alright, then added that he himself had written it years earlier. The man nodded and said he knew, that he had recognized Buddy Holly and that's why he had chosen that particular song. Buddy Holly asked the man if he was a fan of his work, and the man shrugged and said he liked his early stuff. Buddy Holly said fair enough, and asked the man what his name was. The man told him his name was Don McLean III, and said that he himself had once had big dreams of being a successful musician. He'd written tons of songs and even recorded an album once, but never could manage to write that one hit song that he was sure would have put him on the map. The saddest part, he said, was that he knew he had it in him, but he just never had the right inspiration at the right time. Buddy Holly sat with Don McLean and chatted for a while. Don pulled out a bottle of schnapps, and the two men took turns sipping from it as they conversed. Buddy Holly said that there was more to music than writing a few hit songs, and Don McLean said,
"Yeah, easy for you to say."
And then Buddy Holly told Don all about how when he started out making music, he wrote tons of hit songs that people loved, and it made him famous. And for a while, he thought that was all there was to it. But then he had an experience that changed his life. In 1959, he was getting ready for the winter dance party when a crazy fan attacked him with a metal pipe. He knocked him out and dragged him away to a cornfield, where he was left in the freezing snow. The man was never caught, and it took police hours to find Buddy Holly. He was unconscious for a really long time, which is really bad for you, and the blow to his head had given him brain damage, which screwed with his memory and fucked up the way he talked and made it hard for him to sleep at night. He also got frostbite from being outside in the freezing cold for so long, and he almost lost a couple fingers, but doctors were able to save them. It was a year before he was able to play the guitar again, and he even had to relearn how to tie his shoelaces. It was at that point that Don mumbled something, interrupting Buddy Holly. But Buddy Holly didn't hear what he said, and asked him to repeat himself.
"You should have just wore slippers,"
Don repeated, louder this time. Buddy didn't understand what he meant, and Don impatiently explained that instead of relearning to tie his shoes, he should have just got some slippers.
"Or Velcro,"
he added.
"Because when you got brain damage, you've probably got bigger problems than learning how to tie your shoes. And if that's your biggest problem, consider yourself lucky."
I've worn lots of shoes.
Buddy Holly continued telling Don that no one could ever figure out why the crazy fan had knocked him out, but that if it hadn't happened, he would have gotten on a plane to fly to the winter dance party. The plane crashed and everyone on board had died, including his fellow musicians, Richie Valens and the Big Fat Bopper. Don rolled his eyes and said, yeah, he knew, he'd read all about it. So what, he said. They were a couple of nobodies. They were my friends, Buddy Holly said. He said he sometimes thought that maybe if he'd gotten on that plane, things might have gone differently. Maybe they wouldn't have crashed. Maybe he could have stopped it somehow, told the pilot to watch out for that cornfield or something. Don rolled his eyes again, and Buddy Holly admitted that deep down he knew that if he'd gotten on that plane, he would have died along with the others. The crazy fan had saved his life, but it came at a cost. His brain was all fucked up now and he couldn't sleep and sometimes wished he had died, but most days he still managed to be grateful. He told Don that after the incident, his whole mindset changed. He realized that life was too precious to take anything for granted, and he stopped writing pointless pop songs for others to enjoy and began writing songs for himself, songs with deeper meanings. Don rolled his eyes yet again and said,
Yeah, you mean songs like Frowny Clown? That was really deep. A real gem there, buddy, a real diamond in the rough.
Buddy picked up on the sarcasm and defended his song, saying that it was one of his finest works and that it was a metaphor, and Don McLean just didn't get it because he was too stupid and it was a shame that hardly anyone seemed to understand its meaning, but there was nothing he could do about that. Don said the only reason anyone ever even heard Frowny Clown or anything else that Buddy Holly had written in the last 50 years was because he had already established himself as a beloved musician. Don said that he himself had written 100 songs better than Frowny Clown that no one would ever hear. Then he played for Buddy Holly a verse to a song he'd written about James Dean.
When the jester sang for the king and queen in a court he borrowed from James Dean, and a voice that came from you and me. Oh, and while the king was looking down, the jester stole his thorny crown. The courtroom was adjourned. No verdict was returned.
He said that he was sure it would have been a hit if only he could have come up with a few more verses that were just as good. Then maybe he wouldn't be living on a sidewalk. Buddy Holly shrugged and told Don McLean his song was just alright, and Don said that it was better than any of the garbage Buddy Holly had come up with lately, and Buddy Holly said bullshit, and Don McLean said,
Name one song you've written in the last 50 years that's better.
and Buddy Holly said, dirty teeth, and Don McLean laughed and said,
Don't make me laugh.
and then he swung at Buddy Holly with his guitar. Buddy Holly knocked the guitar out of Don McLean's hands and swung at him with the bottle of schnapps. The glass bottle shattered over Don McLean's head and he fell to the ground and stopped moving. Buddy Holly looked down at him. His eyes were closed and blood was trickling from the wound in his forehead. Buddy Holly couldn't tell if the man was unconscious or dead. He told himself he didn't care, that the guy deserved it. It was self-defense, and anyway, nobody was going to care about some washed-up homeless musician that no one had ever heard of. But he didn't wait around for the police to show up, and he headed back in the direction he came from. By the time he got home, Buddy Holly was no longer thinking about the homeless guy he might have just killed a few minutes earlier. He had two things on his mind: the crazy fan who had cracked his skull nearly 50 years earlier, and James Dean, the young movie star who had died in a tragic car crash in 1955, and whom Don McLean had sung about in his unfinished song. Buddy Holly logged onto his PC computer and started reading about James Dean. He'd always been a big fan of James Dean and wished the actor lived to make more than just 3 films. He ordered a book called The Death of James Dean by Warren Beath. Then he began doing some research about the night he'd been cracked in the head by that crazy fan. He found several old articles about it, all of which he'd read before. He even found a transcript of an old interview he'd once given. But then he stumbled upon something he'd never seen before. His research took him to a discussion board about the topic. One user, going by the name of Dark Knight Sabu 666, commented that all of Buddy Holly's music that was written after his head injury was terrible, and that it would have been better if he had been killed in the crash along with fellow musicians Richie Valens and the Big Fat Bopper. Now that was nothing Buddy Holly hadn't heard before. He'd heard it on the streets, yelled at him from the windows of passing cars, and he'd read all about it every time he released a new album. He didn't let it bother him, and he'd stopped reading the reviews a long time ago. So he wasn't at all surprised that someone would write about it in an online discussion board. But the thing that caught his eye was the thumbprint image associated with the user who had posted the comment. Buddy Holly enlarged the image and stared at it in amazement. He recognized the face as the crazy fan who had asked for an autograph and then cracked his skull all those years earlier. He was sure of it, even though the man appeared to have aged very little in the nearly 50 years since the incident.